Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Myers, and I'm a member of the History Department, and I have the pleasure and privilege of moderating the second panel of our conference this afternoon. As a student of Jewish history, including Weimar Germany, I've often wondered what it's like to live life in extremis, in trying circumstances in which one's core assumptions about economic and political stability vanish, in which those deemed alien to the body politic are identified, vilified, and marginalized, and in which we live in a constant state of fragile suspense. Is this Germany in 1933?
Right. Yeah, right. Indeed.
Well, look, we're here in the beautiful surroundings of the Luskin Conference Center, honoring the munificence of Meyer and Rini. So how bad could it be? And I just have to say that once I conducted a conversation with Meyer, with some students, and asked him, as I asked everybody who came to speak in this class, where do you come from? He said, and here I quote, "I come from love." Yeah. Love has been an animating force in his life, including his work in philanthropy, which after all means love of humanity. Love can take us far. And yet, the cracks in the walls of the American political system are visible and widening. And the intense attacks on universities, libraries, cultural institutions, medical research, and the historical profession mark an ominous turn. It's not the first time in the history of the United States, but the scale and force do seem to be unprecedented. And so when we gather today to talk about the future of history, there are real stakes to this conversation. This is what we have to be doing at this moment, at UCLA, in the Luskin Department of History, calling upon history to deliver some measure of illumination onto the present, but also asking and strategizing how we can preserve, protect, and expand the study of history for coming generations. For without that, we will make our way sightless into the future. To engage in that work of questioning and strategizing today, and I should add that we will continue with future of history events over the course of the academic year, but today we have an extraordinary panel anchored by our country's leading public historian, a good friend of ours at UCLA, and the 14th secretary. And this might be the giveaway to you, sir. The 14th secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, Dr. Lonnie Bunch.
Yes.
Lonnie, if I hadn't sprained my right hand, I would applaud too. But Lonnie will be joined by two distinguished UCLA colleagues, and I'm a real believer in brevity and introduction, so that's what will flow. Athena Jackson, who is the Norman and Armena Powell University librarian, and Robin Kelley, who really needs no introduction, but who is distinguished professor and holds the Gary B. Nash Chair in American History. Before beginning the panel, yes.
And I must say, I'm so pleased with Robin because Robin followed me at what is now UMass Dartmouth.
Yes, that's right.
See, I was in the office and I was lousy. They hired him.
That was a lot.
It hasn't turned out so well for you, Lonnie. I'm sorry to hear. Before beginning the panel, I want to offer a final word. In times of great challenge, we rightfully wonder what will be our salvation. Nietzsche offers up the prospect that creativity follows periods of destruction, a rule of history that my own area of study, Jewish history, instantiates. At the same time, it's hard not to summon up a later German thinker who, in a genuine state of extremis, while being pursued by Nazis, called our attention to the angel of history. I'm referring, of course, to Walter Benjamin and his reading of the painter Paul Klee's Angelus Novus, the angel of history. The angel of history, Benjamin enjoined us, trained its eyes on the discarded of the past, its forgotten victims, while being pushed forward by the storm of paradise, which we might read as the onrushing tide of progress or as a political force of some sort that doesn't want us to focus on the lost voices of the past. And so we move between Nietzsche's prospect of creative destruction and Benjamin's angel of history, trying to find out where we are at this moment and what we must do. So let's indeed have that conversation. And I'm going to take my ask our country's leading public historian, where are we at this current moment? And I'm wondering in particular, and this came up in conversation with our alumna, Rachel Deblinger, to what might we analogize this moment? Have we indeed ever seen anything like this? So where are we at in the broad flow of U.S. history at this moment? And you seem well positioned to answer that.
I thought you were going to ask me what it was like to have a 2-hour lunch with Trump. Okay, this is much.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Well, geez.
From the sublime to the ridiculous. So.
Great. I mean, I really think that this is a really interesting and important moment on several levels because it's almost like a perfect storm. On the one hand, there is a moment where you see fear that you really haven't seen before, that has really permeated every aspect of life in some ways, and especially history, the study of history. So you see, how do you handle the political impact of those who believe strongly that everything I've ever believed in is wrong, who believe that any story that talks about complexity, ambiguity, race is wrong. So figuring out, one, at this moment, how do you fight the good fight? How do you make sure that you're not just saying what you want to say, but saying things that change the discourse? I'm struck by how political this moment is, but I'm also struck by the challenge in history to really say, and I was so pleased to hear so much about the public, because I would argue one of the greatest challenges for historians is to realize that history is too important to be just in the hands of historians. And that I would argue that those who have realized that you have an opportunity to help a nation understand itself, not just by the courses you teach, but by the things you speak, by the collaborations you enter into, that is so important. And it's so important to me personally because when I went to work at the Smithsonian for the very first time, my dissertation director said, "You had a good career, you threw it away." I called him the other day. Asked if he needed a job, but anyway. But I think the other issue, it's really about how do we as historians matter? How do we make a difference in profound ways, in ways that are obvious, the work, the research, the writing, but in ways that maybe aren't obvious, to say, here's what we know. How do we activate it so it can help change a nation? I would also argue that one of the challenges we face, especially as I hear so many people criticize history, is in some ways we act like we're still the last great craft guild and that we have secret knocks and special handshakes. We don't let people see beyond the veil. And yet by not letting people understand how we do what we do, we fall into their trap. It's a group of leftists. As somebody in the White House said to me at a lunch.
2 hours?
2.5. They said to me, my idea is just as good as anybody else's idea. And I said, what about research? What about scholarship? What about integrity? And he said, that's only something the left has to worry about. Yeah, that was a great lunch. But I think the other piece for me is really this question that you all started to raise earlier, which is what's the role of technology? What is AI doing for us? In some ways, I've had a lot of people in Congress say to me, you don't need historians because you got AI. And so that is really frightening. So I guess my argument is that you can look back and say there are moments where we've had the fear of McCarthyism. There are moments where you've had people come in who basically said, the federal government is horrible. Let me be the outsider. There are moments where you've had people who say, let us use war, let us use ethnicity to divide us. But I would argue I've never seen it all done so well.
Right.
This group has come in with strong ideas, but also with a plan to implement it.
Yeah.
For many of us, the idea is permanent, is central, is important. To them, the idea is only one step in this transformation of a nation. So I am not a Chicken Little. The sky is not falling, but it's cracked. And we need to do something strong.
That's right. That's right.
I want to thank you. Before we move to Athena, I just want to ask, one of the things that you have done so masterfully is navigated the rocky shoals of Washington, D.C. The National Museum for African American History and Culture would not have taken rise without your extraordinary navigation of those shoals. And that means, God bless your soul, working both sides of the aisle night and day. I mean, working closely with Republican members of Congress with whom you share virtually nothing politically. I would imagine that has completely changed.
It's much harder now. I've always felt you dance with the devil to do God's work. But I think that building the African American Museum, now remember, I started that 20 years ago.
Right.
And 20 years ago, there were people on both sides of the aisle that I could talk to about ideas, about race, about recognizing that an African American museum is not a museum for African Americans. That is the quintessential American story. And that's why it's been so popular. But today, it's really interesting when I reach out to both sides of the aisle, which I do. The Republicans who are out of office always say the right thing, but they're out of office. When I ask for people who are in office to support, they'll call me and they'll say, you've got to stand firm, but I can't say anything. So in a way, the fear is really so palpable on the Hill. I think the challenge is that you also have the Democrats that I deal with without a vision, without a plan, without a strategy, except to say, we'll see you at the midterms.
Right.
That's not a strategy.
Right.
So in some ways, I would argue that this is a time, I'm never extreme, but I think that this is a time where democracy really is at risk.
Yeah.
And I don't see the thing we've always counted on, a kind of guardrails, a kind of checks and balances, a kind of community uplift saying we want to make change. I see people marching, but I don't see a strategy. I see people saying, woe is me, but I don't see people using that woe as energy to transform and to change. So in a way, I just think that this is the moment for those of us who care about history to use it as a weapon, as a tool to change a nation, to remind the nation of what it could be and force it to what we think it should become, which is a place that's ripe with freedom and fairness.
Yeah. I have to say, I wonder about this, ponder this question of mass politics and what has happened to it. We could say it's a vestige of the distant past, but the tens of millions of people who took the streets in the wake of the murder of George Floyd make clear it was not a distant memory. In our lifetime, in the last 5 years, we saw, and it is perplexing to ask what prevents that taking to the streets, not once a month for a No Kings demonstration, but every day, or something akin to that amounts to an ongoing sustained strategy to meet the moment, which is exposes in shocking fashion the fragility. I mean, that's what's so striking, the fragility of the remaining democratic institutions and values.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, look, let's be honest, that in some ways, I believe the Smithsonian is really the last entity standing at that level, right? That is basically able to say, we can explore difficult and challenging issues. We can explore questions of race or gender. And so I would argue, I would look to see where the Smithsonian is a year from now. If the Smithsonian is still standing, then I think people can rally around. But if not, it tells me if the Smithsonian fails, I think it really tells us about the weakness of our democracy.
Sobering. Okay, we will get back to you, I promise, to more.
I'm done.
Athena, I'm really interested in how it looks to you from your perspective at a more local level, overseeing an extraordinary cultural institution, which is the UCLA Library, but also calling upon your understanding of the history of cultural institutions in this country. How do things look to you at this moment?
Thank you. It's an honor to sit next to my colleagues here today. And I just want to express how libraries, I hope, are still, and archives are the raw matter of your work. But to Kelley's good point, the community and their materials are also part of the story. So extending and creating that extension that's seamless to the community story, along with the curated collections in our libraries, is what's going to put us at a better advantage of telling our future history. My biggest, earlier in my career, my fear was our repeating history or not learning lessons from it. Today, my fear is a huge lacuna in the history of today because it will not be preserved, because it will not be prioritized, and maybe even will not be allowed to be preserved. I just came here from the University of Houston in Texas, where a lot of my colleagues in Texas are facing all kinds of assault on how they collect and how they think about their histories. And for me, it is personal, professional, and urgent. Personally, I am the daughter of an undocumented Mexican who came in the 50s. So she had to take a bus to Houston, Texas without her parents knowing, and they made her a citizen and without her even speaking English. She thought United States of America was just this weird long word. Yeah. And she came back to her home as a citizen because that's just how they did it. And so her story was, it's just a matter of the timeline, whether you're a dreamer or you're awake in this country. And I love that line because she told me, you could have been a dreamer if I was a little younger. And that's why it's very personal. Why it's professional is because I used to work here at UCLA as the director of library special collections. And I'm so proud of the collections we build and preserve, the community engagement, the way we work globally through, you mentioned Rachel Levenger, she's in the room. She's probably shaking her head, no, don't say my name. And
Rachel, raise your hand. She's the one who's shaking her head. No.
And she works actively along with a lot of my colleagues. We're well known as a university that not only collects for the curriculum and for the research that happens here, but we collect for future research. We collect deeply so that global communities can come here. We have one of the largest Judaica collections, Islamic collections, you name it, East Asia Library, the Film and Television Archive, it's here in our library. So professionally, I feel an obligation to safeguard our collections grounded in our curriculum, but hopefully supported by the values of the historical record. And finally, I feel a sense of urgency as an administrator. All of us at UCLA and senior leadership care so deeply about what's happening on our campus, to our university, to our state. And I can't think of a better group that I want to be around because we are at the center of it all, one of the biggest moments in higher education and cultural literacy. So for me, those are things that happen at UCLA, but they're happening at different ways from smaller liberal arts college, community colleges, high schools, libraries, museums all over the world. So that's my take on where we are right now.
So can I just ask, what's the conversation amongst your colleagues around the country? What are you talking about? How are you sort of girding up for, what is going to be a sustained assault upon institutions like libraries, like things called the book, the cherished text.
Yeah.
What's the conversation, and what are you strategizing about?
I want to go back to Brenda's question about what we would be talking about if this wasn't happening right now. And this moment is taking a lot of oxygen and dialogue out of our meetings, our agendas, where we should be talking about technological integration, disruption. We should be talking about race and environment. We should be talking about sustainability and cultural competencies, and those are just not on the table because we're talking about how we're going to safeguard our budgets, how we're going to support this the important humanistic record while also serving major medical enterprises and healthcare systems all over our countries, because we're talking about these big organizations. So when we think about the future of the book or the future of the object, it really is the future of information and how it can become knowledge, and what that intersection used to be versus now, where there's intervention, whether we like it or not, through AI and other technologies trying and attempting to intercede in between the moments of education and true pedagogy so that people can really have discernment. I always tell everyone that the library appreciates all the experts in the room, but we center curiosity because that is how we're going to get people to want to come. So I think the story right now is a little bit part existential and also part transformational. I would say that's kind of what the tenor is.
And just, I'm wondering, at this time of challenge to collecting, whether this is a moment to double down on community collecting, consistent with what Kelley was talking about, what you referenced in your earlier remarks. What's the state of community collecting, using people out there in the world as collectors in the larger project of the accumulation of knowledge?
Yeah, I like that question. I would say, because I'm in a room full of wonderful advocates at my university, that we need to get our collections made accessible. We have an enormous backlog across our country in our archives. They're not graves. They're supposed to be alive and activated. And so to begin with, we have to clean up our house before we invite people over. And for me, that's going to be really critical to do the community outreach, is to demonstrate we care about our historical record that we already preserve. So that's digitization. That's digitization, but that's even just processing and describing. Sometimes I like to tell folks that the best way to get people excited about a collection isn't necessarily putting it online. It's getting it into the curriculum and getting our students excited about it. They're the best word of mouth. And connecting our students to our collections and the communities we engage with is that sweet spot that you're talking about. But we do have, I would say, a crisis in the historical record being accessible. And today, digitization is one of the most critical ways of doing that. But we all know that there's one big barrier, and that's sort of the legal boundaries around the way you can provide access to materials right now. So it's a very rich tapestry of all the activities. I just told my whole team the other day that I'd rather not be on the verge of chaos. I keep saying we're on the verge of progress. We're on the verge of something really good, and I have to keep thinking that way just to come into work every day.
Creativity follows destruction. So, Robin, you have been chronicling throughout your career the deep structures of inequality and injustice in this country, and therefore, as a general matter, little surprises you when things seem to go bad in this country. I'm wondering where you see this moment.
Yeah, and just
difference of degree, difference of kind.
Yeah, I'm not a pessimist either. Just so you know, I mean, just because I'm not surprised. Let me begin by doing two things. First of all, if I can make a couple of pitches, which is tied to this question. One is I'm really encouraging everyone to go see the Monument Show at MoCA.
Yeah.
It's because it's actually part of this conversation that we're having. And also, if anyone's around on campus next Monday at 6:30, Jesse Hagopian has a new book called Teach Truth. He's part of the Howard Zinn project. And it is an amazing book. We're doing a book talk at Murphy Hall, right, in your Gatwick.
You're going right to the belly of the beast.
6:30, right? It's 3312 So if you can make it, it's very, very important because this is really an extension of this conversation. And then also, I just want to say publicly that Lonnie Bunch is the leader we need.
Yeah,
I mean, and I really want to emphasize that because, I read that letter that you received, the one that from August 12th. I just have to mention this because it's signed by Lindsay Halligan, right? Who, now illegally appointed district attorney, whatever. Vince Haley,
Yep.
who is a speechwriter, worked for Gingrich. I guess what makes him legitimate is the fact that Gingrich has a PhD in history, and that makes him legitimate.
And he curses well.
And he curses well, right? And Russell Vogt. So these three people are the ones that are basically trying to drill down and tell the head of the Smithsonian what that institution ought to be doing. And by the way, if you don't know this, Lonnie is the first, and I don't mean just the first Black person, he's the first historian to be head of the Smithsonian. Yeah. So the way you stood up, I think, is something we have to, it's a model for all of us, right? It's a model for, and you did it in a way because like you and I, we come from places where we have home training,
Yep.
right? You know what I'm saying? Yep. So our home training means that you know how to do it in a way that is gracious and you beat their ass. So I'm right with you. Now on this question of what's new, I mean, I hold the Gary B. Nash chair.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It means that Gary B. Nash has been fighting this fight for a long time. Mm-hmm. In other words, these fights are not necessarily new ones, but like Lonnie was saying, there is a kind of, there's an upsurge, a kind of qualitative shift that's unlike any other period we have. But keep in mind, the 1776 Commission was created under the first Trump administration. So many of these wars around the history curriculum begin at the state level. We've been involved in this for a while. And suddenly, because of Trump's second term, but because of the extremism, people are kind of waking up, right, to this. And so it's not that we don't have the tools, but in many ways, when we can't speak about inequality as a historical phenomenon and understand it, because that's the other thing is that, we could talk all day about our history, what's their history. That's, to me, interesting. But what's really interesting is understanding how is it that some people become poor? How is it that state policies could actually push people under the bus? How is it people are policed in such a way that impacts their lives? And that's one of the beautiful things about $1 Million Hoods, right? And all the work that Kelley is doing, it actually explains to people why is it that there is a correspondence, not always, between skin color, location, and poverty. And what makes it worse is all those white people who are expected to not have to experience that are experiencing that right now. And I was joking with Keeanga Yamada Taylor, who's a good friend of mine. It's like she and I and a few others are the only ones who seem to be standing up for poor white people. The white people are not. We're like, they're oppressed. And you got people inside of the White House and inside the Republican Party who don't have they don't even make an attempt to protect them. And so part of doing history is making sure that we keep digging to understand how is it that this system continues to reproduce itself and what can we do to shift it? And that is the dangerous work. That's why we're called leftists. That's why we're called, it's not just because we talk about people who are not Afrikaners, right?
So, go ahead, Lonnie.
No, please.
I'll get back to Robin.
No, I mean, I think Robin is so right on this. I mean, I think the question for me is, the question for me is that I think that in some ways we spend a lot of time looking at complexity, and what the right has done is eliminated complexity completely, right? And so it's about, how did they say it to me? It's about, why is it that you hate America? Because you tell stories that make people uncomfortable. Now, how do you handle that, right? Because it's not about a debate at all. There's no way to really fight that. But I think that the challenge really for us is we've got to fight it on two levels. One is the level of what we always do. This is the scholarship. This is the story. This is the work we do. But the other level is, all right, what does that mean to a broader audience? How do we make the argument so it's clear that talking about race is really celebrating the best of what America can be rather than looking at the worst of America?
Right.
And so I think that's the challenge.
Yeah.
So I want to, pick up on that and ask all of us about what we at the university can do differently, perhaps. And this idea was raised in the earlier panel because communicability, legibility, reaching beyond is not just good pedagogically, it's necessary for survival. And I wonder, as the attacks began to rain down upon UCLA, one of the things that became clear was we need allies out there in the community that we putatively serve. And, I and various other people said, we need to create a people's university and take our knowledge out to the streets, to the public square, to make clear why it's important to know about the erosion of democracy or what fascism is so that you can identify its signs. And I'm just wondering what you think about the state of higher education in that regard. What measure of self-critique or what action steps do you think we need to engage in order to connect to that wider public, in order to engage in effective resistance, which I wanted to come back and ask you about anyway. So maybe I'll point to you, Robin. What do you think we haven't done, or what do you think we need to do? And what do you think we need to do?
You're going to ask me that question. I'm a troublemaker here at UCLA. Darnell could tell you. I cause trouble all the time. So I'm probably the worst person to ask that question. But let me just say a few things. I mean, we have a responsibility, not just because we're at a university, but specifically we're at a land-grant public institution. And we owe our community. And part of that is doing multiple things. One is we need to fight really hard to make sure, despite Prop 209, that we're not just the ones going out in community, but that community can come in. And when I say community, not people who are trying to beat up our students, but I'm talking about actual students themselves, right? Who can come and take classes. We need to reduce tuition so that we could, if not, go back to the original plan of no tuition. And that's one side of it. But the other side of it is when you talk about the People's University, UCLA tends, like any other university, tends to do things like Columbia. They move into communities, but sometimes as landlords, sometimes collecting land, building structures, and things like that. When part of it is like, how do we not just share knowledge, but produce new forms of knowledge in community? In other words, it's not just us coming from the mountaintop to hand knowledge, but there's knowledge embedded in those communities that's so rich, so much history, so much analysis that's already there. There are grassroots organizations that have done an enormous amount of research. And again, this goes back to Kelley's point. We know that they exist, And if anything, one of the things I'm so glad that you're now a librarian, because lots of librarians in the past have actually exploited those relationships to extract that knowledge and bring it to the university, make it inaccessible. So I don't think that there's anything that we should be doing specifically that says this is what the people need. We have to figure out what people need in relationship to being with people and understanding and listening and paying attention. Because no matter what we think about universities, and I'm very proud to be a part of one, universities are often places where things blow up first. And they don't blow up first because we're smarter. They blow up because there's a porousness between the street and the campus, right? Between the world and the campus. What happens in one part of the world is going to blow up in our campus because we care. And we do a job teaching our students to care. And when they do that, they have to be defended and protected, in relationship to other kinds of struggles. So that's what I see. I mean, that may sound abstract, but I think it's still yet to be written. And one last thing I should say is that I don't think that the current crisis under the second Trump administration is the beginning and end. We had this problem before, we're going to have it after.
Yeah, though I will say, Lonnie's question is hovering. What will be the extent of destruction after they do their work? Will there be a Smithsonian standing? That seems to be of significantly different order, and the work of building after that destruction will be immensely difficult, it seems to me. But Athena, you'll give us a little ray of hope, perhaps. The university and the library may be consistent with what Robin says. Very important point of, we don't want to extract and bring here. We want to, partner with people where they are.
I have so many geeky things to say right now. Because one of the reasons why I went into administration wasn't because I fell out of love with books. It's because I feel deeply responsible for how we're going to establish the policies of discovery of access. That is so important to me. We can't even begin to grapple with the fact that our most powerful systems for research and all the data underneath it is in English only most of the time. Diacritics are really hard to discover, and it's a challenge to engage even in some of the cultural competencies. But then when you think about personal identities and proclaimed and self-identified ways a person can move through life will change sometimes, and how we can honor that with respect and dignity as that happens through our system. So when I think about what the academy should be doing, our demographics are a destiny. We have so many languages in this country. We have so many ways to think about what happens when most of our high school graduates come from a non-English speaking homes, and how are we going to be able to embrace them? I come from a very low socioeconomic community. I'm from the barrio. I'm so proud of where I come from. And I remember when I was in high school and I was succeeding, and someone, I won't name the demographic, but you could guess, he told me I was a diamond in the rough. And I'll never forget this, because I came home and told my dad this, and my dad said, they're just really bad miners. There's lots of diamonds here. There are so many diamonds here. Because it's such a true sentiment that I'm a unique person because of my cultural background, that I couldn't succeed. But that stuck with me a lot. So I think our academy, to your point, needs to learn more than just translation. We need to learn how to sit back and listen and be taught. And that's hard when we're thinking about policies and we're thinking about all of the different elements that create this big bureaucratic infrastructure. But I, for one, think that the only way, in my opinion, that we can ensure that the Smithsonian stays in existence is that we're behind you 100% with the same lockstep support, right? That we're all saying the same thing from all of our chairs, no matter where we are. That would be a dream of mine too.
Yeah. So on that very point, Lonnie, what do you need from your university colleagues?
I think, first of all, I've always thought the university was a cauldron of possibility, a cauldron that allowed me to believe because of the ideas that were done, the debates that occurred. And I wanted that cauldron to spill out of the university. I mean, one of the things that always struck me is that I became a much better historian when I began to work with the living community. It changed everything about how I thought about history, how I thought about my role, and I thought about the amazing learning that I had by working with those communities, first here in LA and then throughout the South. So for me, it's this notion of how do you in a university find those relationships to change it? And let me give you an example. 2 weeks ago academic colleagues that I love wanted to support the Smithsonian. So they came down in front of the museum, the African American Museum, and held a teach-in. Now think about it. A teach-in. It's not 1968. And what happened was it was done with such passion and had no impact at all. And so part of what my argument is as a historian, don't throw away the past, but don't be held captive by it.
Yes.
And really find ways that you can make your voices heard. And it's in simple ways. I need to see more op-eds supporting these kinds of issues, right? I need to see the opportunity that I can't do. I'm not supposed to lobby. Y'all can lobby, right? And so I think it's really seeing that active and then really thinking about, is there a kind of umbrella organization among universities that is really not about saving the Smithsonian, but it's about saving our cultural heritage. Because it's not just the Smithsonian, it's risk. When the Smithsonian falls, everybody else will fall. I get that. But the goal here is to say, how do we recognize that the work that's being done on Afro-Latinos here in LA is at risk? How do we protect that? So in some ways, it's really thinking about what is the broadest strategy possible that allows us to really have the impact. But I think to Robin's point, maybe to your point, there's no doubt in my mind there's a whole lot of destruction, a whole lot of damage. So part of it is thinking about what do we do 10 years from now? Thinking about who are those students? What are the kinds of training we need to give people? What is the kind of history that we need to collect today so that they can learn from that? So recognizing that, as I tell my staff all the time, we fight the battle right now. What you want to make sure is you win the battle 20 years from now.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's the way I begin to think about it.
Right. Can I ask a follow-up question, Lonnie? So, I know part of David's question was about the academy. What do you think about the professional historical organizations? I mean, AHA, OHA all have their offices in DC. Have they been, to your mind, effective in supporting the work that needs to be done?
I'm the incoming president of the AHA. So I expect it to be a different AHA.
That was a setup.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate that. That's why he's my guy. I'm telling you. But I do think that, we haven't done a good job using our organizations. We haven't. Partly it's because I'm not convinced of the political clout of our organizations. But on the other hand, when you're in a battle, you got to use all the weapons you have. And those organizations should be much more active. And I understand the debates about it because they're a risk. But I think that there are risks for not speaking up that I think are greater than the risk of speaking up.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to go back to that, but I have to say, it's a pleasure to be with you. You're a great institution builder. You're a great thinker. You're a great storyteller. And
I'm just a kid from Jersey.
You're just a kid from Jersey. And it would be irresponsible of me to ask you not to tell the story of your 2-hour lunch. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, man, but break it down for us.
I think the hardest part of this was knowing that I had a week to prepare for 2.5. Well, I thought it was going to be a 45-minute lunch. And so, what the biggest question I had? Not how am I going to respond if he asks this or if he criticizes that, but if the guy is rude, how do you walk out of the White House? They got guns. You can't walk out. So I was trying to figure out how the hell do I get out of there? But I think that what was really clear to me was my job was to think about what the irreducibles were. Of all the things that were going to come up, what are the things that I had to fight over? What are the things I had to be clear over and let go other things? And so it was an interesting balance. It was sort of like I kept waiting for the sword of Damocles, right, to come take my head off. So every time I'm saying something, I'm trying to look, and it was the most stressful lunch I've ever had in my life, because the notion was that there was no logic to the conversations, right? You couldn't make an argument about this is why this is important. That didn't matter at all. So then you realize, how do you negotiate with somebody who you can't negotiate with? And so what I figured out I had to do was I had to just be clear. Here's where I stand on this. Here's where I stand on that. And this is where we are. And there are things that are my responsibility that are not your responsibility. And we'll have to fight over this if push comes to shove.
How did it go over?
I haven't been invited back. I mean, I think that one of the things that is really clear from this administration is they believe they're going to win. So it really doesn't matter in a way to the argument. They just think they're going to walk right over you. And I think that the challenge is universities, large cultural institutions have to risk a lot, but they've got to stand firm.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing that these folks understand.
Yeah. And I have to say, your candor and forthrightness and willingness to stand up are pretty extraordinary in this moment, and we deeply appreciate it.
That's right.
I do want to ask you about the status of the Smithsonian, which I don't fully understand. It's an independent institution that receives 62% of its funding from the government, and the chair of the Board of Regents is none other than the Chief Justice of the United States. How's that going?
Let me simply say that the Smithsonian is a trust instrumentality created in 1842, which means it's got such Byzantine and bizarre rules. But what has protected the Smithsonian is, yes, the vice president is a member of the board. The chief justice is the chancellor of the Smithsonian. But the president has no power to appoint anybody on the Board of Regents. That's the governing body of the Smithsonian. So that's why I still have a job, to be perfectly honest. We're not like the Kennedy Center, where it's easy to say you appoint these folks, fire them, and new people come in. The challenge for the Smithsonian will be there are going to be 4 vacancies by the end of this year. And
On the Board of
Regents. So the question really is, are they going to be able to negotiate and navigate that? Or will it be 4 people that the administration wants? And that'll be the telling tale of what happens with the Smithsonian.
Who appoints the regents?
They usually are appointed. It's self-appointing. But what you do is you then get Congress to approve it.
Self-appointing means what?
What's that?
Self-appointing means
Well, in
what?
other words, we're starting to come up with a slate. Here are 4 people we think would be great to be in this role. Usually you give it to the Congress, and they basically, 9 times out of 10, ratify it. It's a different era. The Smithsonian hopes that's what's going to happen. I do not believe that. So I think it's going to be a takeover in the next 6 months.
What are your plans?
Come to UCLA. No.
Yeah. Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost. We all heard that.
See, Lonnie, we could switch. You could take my job.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to consider Robin as Secretary of the Smithsonian at this point.
No.
He'd do such a better job than me.
Oh, no.
I doubt that.
Already.
All right, Robin, I want to, as we move to the end of our time, and then we'll open up for questions in just a few minutes. I know this is something you've thought a lot about, or you've just lived it. But at this moment of fraughtness and really extremeness, what do you think the job of the historian is?
It's not an easy question, because I think about this every day, and each day is different. I think there's certain fundamental things we always have to do. And this may seem corny, but we have to do our work. That is to say, we're living in a world where people make up shit. And we have to do our work. We have to do our research. We have to, produce scholarship that is based on something. I think we're all responsible in some ways for speaking to a public. I always kind of reel back from this idea that they're like the public intellectuals and the private intellectuals. But there was a time, at least in the earlier generation when I was younger, when a lot of scholars spoke to the public. It wasn't an unusual thing. We need to humble ourselves to both the task ahead, and by that I mean, this is hard work. It's very hard work. And I find that I don't want to say it's a whole generation, but there are a lot of people who think it's not hard work. And they end up becoming something of pundits as opposed to historians, which means that as a historian means that you have to confront the contradictions that make you uncomfortable to be able to tell something like a truth. And I think that truth is still a valuable term. And finally, as human beings on the planet, I just feel a responsibility for trying to make this world better than the way we entered it, and to be generous as educators, as scholars, but also as human beings, and to show what's possible. What we're living through now is fascism. There's no other way to put it. And to be anti-fascist is to be pro-human. To be pro-human is to be pro-life in terms of all forms of life itself. And as historians, if we're studying the reproduction and social reproduction of human beings and life itself, whether it's the land, trees, forest, whatever, then we've got to figure out a way to do our scholarship that cares about life. And you can't care about life and do this work and not fight against fascism. I mean, there's just, you can't put your head in the sand. Yeah. So I feel like that's my responsibility. Other people may have different opinions, but I don't want to say that it's easy.
Yeah. Athena, what do you think is the job of the librarian in this moment?
Ooh. I'm going to say librarian and archivist.
Librarian and archivist.
Yes, because they're wonderful roles that I have the honor to administer every day. There are understandings. I think everybody has a nostalgic, wonderful memory of the library. And I want you to hold on to that as a seed, but understand that the tree that's growing looks very different. And there's a lot of very unique and critical expertise. There's a mandate to serve, at least for me, 46,000 wonderful reasons to come to work every day, which are our students. And for us to be able to be scalable and to be accessible, to be in alignment with goals, and to have autonomy to engage comes in conflict a lot, right? And how do we do that is really, to your point, is that humility and that awareness of where we stand right now in this moment, which has a lot to do with helping our students and our colleagues know that literacy is a health issue. Mm-hmm. It's very much a health mm-hmm. issue. And secondly, that mis and disinformation is very, very sneaky. And we have to create more savvy around understanding that. And I can't think of another group of people I can do that with in this current crop of librarians and archivists. And then vis-a-vis the historical record, I think that the most important thing is to remind ourselves and remind our donors and our colleagues across the campus that we have to be mindful of not letting people buy themselves into the historical record. We have to elevate everything at once, right? So to feel like you can invest in, I would love for somebody to take my dad's papers, but I want to just give money so that it can elevate all those ships at the same time, so that those papers can be part of that. Because if we lean too much into sort of a history that's defined by the wealthiest, we can get into some problematic spaces. And finally, I think the librarian and archivist needs to do better in engaging with our colleagues at the major research institutions that aren't wedded into the university ecosystem, so that we can build more collaborations and have those sunny moments.
In some ways, I think Robin's right. The job of a historian is really hard. but I also think it's simple. To me, a historian's job is to define reality and give hope. That's it.
I love that.
So I want to maybe build on that by saying, when I think of the task of the historian today, I in fact think back to that image of the angel of history that Benjamin gives us, and the gaze of the angel upon the lost voices of the past, not merely as a moral act of reclamation, but because there's so much genius embedded there. And if we think of how history can offer up hope, it's precisely in the recovery of ideas that have been forgotten that can be brought back into current discourse. When we think we're at a point of complete no return or dead end, the archive of the past, the repository of the past, what some have called the detritus of the past, contain within it so much that is worthy of consideration. Just as we think the world of the future will not resemble what was. The destruction will be substantial, and going back to the paradigm that existed before will not be sufficient. Yeah. The past offers up a repository of ideas worthy of reconsideration. So I always think that's part of what is not just ennobling, but necessary about history right now. And I want to just mention one other thing that relates to my sense of mission. And it became very clear to me after I left UCLA to take a job in New York for a year, where I wasn't received so well, it turns out, public protests in front of the building where I worked, and then came back because, Darnell, this is the greatest damn institution in the United States. We have two brilliant colleagues here and a future colleague here. But what I understood my mission, and I know Robin takes this so very seriously, and some of his students are in this room, our job is to teach students,
Right.
Yeah.
and to empower them. And I think that mission has never been more important than
That's
today.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. We could go on for a long time, but I want to give folks here an opportunity to ask questions. So the floor is now open to your questions and comments. Yes, right there, please.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I got my PhD here, and I see Ellen. I don't know if you remember me. I got it in 1997, but I know.
Do you want to say your name?
And you.
You want to say your name?
Kate Cannon, and Bruce
Welcome back.
Schulman was my dissertation
Oh, okay.
advisor. But I'm wondering, I mean, all of us watched with horror as the East Wing was just knocked down. And then we thinking back of Trump leaving in his first term, the White House with boxes of documents and the archives having to chase him for that. And then he got away with it, really, frankly. And I'm wondering, are we going to be at that point that we're literally, do you ever, especially our archivists, are we at the point where we're like going to be afraid, that we're going to have to hold on to boxes of documents and hide them somewhere? I mean, is there when you said, is the Smithsonian going to still be standing? I'm literally thinking, is it still going to be standing? So I'm wondering, is that something we should actually think about and consider and worry about?
I would argue that the Smithsonian will stand because, in a way, we're at a point where we need the crisis to move us forward. And I think if you come after the Smithsonian that way, you will have poked a bigger bear than you think. You come to the African American Museum and try to close that down, you poke a bigger bear than you think. So my sense is that while I have to worry, I recognize the Smithsonian will stand regardless. But I have to tell you, people call me every day saying, oh my God, I gave the Smithsonian artifacts. Do I need to take them back? Or, oh my God, I've got a film crew. Can I come in and document everything in the Smithsonian? So there is this fear. And as long as I'm running the Smithsonian, nothing's going to leave.
Yes. Yes.
Amen. Amen.
Go ahead.
In a room full of wonderful historians, I just want to answer this through the lens of scientific data that happened recently, where we were very worried about the assault on our research data and people actively trying to go into PubMed and download their research or download data that they were afraid was going to get turned off. And not only that, a bigger fear that was in my ecosystem was adulterated data. Like it's going to stay, but it might get changed. It might get modified. It might tell a different story. So the veracity of the historical record in the digital age is very, very critical right now to making sure we can define reality and give hope, because this scientific research and historical memory, to me, are at dual assault right now. And it's hard to your point, all the prongs are coming from different areas. So somebody, people ask you, how are you doing? Have you sighed most of the time when someone asks that? They're like, how are you? Like, and that's just how we are right now. But that's, to me, is where the biggest, most recent issue was around that. But certainly safeguarding our collections, like Lonnie, I will stand in front of that building before anything like that happens.
We'll be there with you.
Yeah.
Rob.
I would stand there too. And I would, but I agree with everything that's been said. I don't want to repeat it, but I just want to add one sort of twist. And that I started out as an Africanist. That's my field here at UCLA. And their archives are very different. Archives are often looted. That is looting of archives in Africa that end up in Europe, and not just archives, but other kinds of materials. So in some ways, yes, we need to defend the Smithsonian. We need to defend our archives. We also need to think also about repatriation in a broader global sense of like, how do we basically make right the collection of materials? Sometimes those materials are not written materials. They could be art. And think about that also as part of the project of making things right. But I agree with you. I mean, Trump should have went to jail for a lot of things, and that's one of them.
Yep. I just want to share my fear with you, as long as you're putting fears overtly on the table. I teach a class every year on Israel-Palestine. And as I was tinkering with the syllabus this year, I wondered, how long will it take before there is someone telling me, I'm sorry, you can't have that book or article on your syllabus. That you can, that you can't. That's happening at institutions in this country. And it's not far-fetched to assume it could happen elsewhere. And I think just as we all need to join to defend our library when someone comes to try to take material away, we too have to defend ourselves, be prepared to defend ourselves against that prospect of external oversight of the actual content of what we teach and research. Again, this is where we're at. This is why we are in times that we have not been in for a very long time, if at all, in the United States. And we need to be organized. Toby, I see you over there. You'll give us instructions on how to, when how the movement will organize, where we'll meet, and what action. Join the Faculty Association. Okay. But we really need to take these threats very seriously and figure out how to organize. Okay. Other questions? Yeah, we have a question in the back.
This is directed to Dr. Kelley, but anyone on the panel. Okay. When you were speaking about this number of Americans, white Americans who weren't expected to experience poverty, I think those were your words, but now are, you made me reflect. When I walked into Cal State LA in 1967, and we fought to create EOP and create Chicano Studies, we were fighting for that equality of opportunity with people who we never thought were going to live like us in East LA.
Exactly.
When I retired a few years ago, it was amidst a growing and massive equality of poverty. So my question is, and I mean equality of poverty, but massive white people. I've been in Mississippi. It's growing. And thank you for mentioning that. We're on the threshold of the 250th birthday. Historians, how do you help America keep the understanding about the equality of opportunity that hasn't been achieved, but turn new understanding towards this growing equality of poverty and its perils?
Right. I mean, other people can also answer that question. I mean, and I just want to also give I don't want to give the impression that white poverty is new. It's always been there. It's the conception somehow that there's a deserving poor and the undeserving poor, which of course is an old idea. And part of that resentment is this idea that, wait a second, I'm white, so there's no way I should live like this, and welfare, when you receive it. And even the war on poverty, lifted more white people out of poverty, especially the elderly, rural communities, and that's great. But still, we are kind of trapped in this idea that inequality is specifically racial because of racial difference. The myth of race again, that it's IQ, it is, backwardness, it's laziness. That's why certain people are poor and others are not. And so I think it's a very dangerous thing. And so one of the organizations I work with is called Surge, which standing up for justice, standing up for racial justice rather. And they work with white people, organizing white working people across the board to get people to understand how the system works. And they are very successful in moving people from the Trump agenda, not to the Democrats, but to something even better than that, because there is better. Where, and part of that has to do with speaking to people, helping them understand it. And our job as teachers and writers is to lay that out, and also recognize that some of the people who are involved in reproducing that same poverty, making very bad legislative decisions, look like me, right? That is the political class that could be, just as dark as anyone, making those decisions. So who's your friend? Who's the one who's supporting you under what circumstances? In history, part of our job is to explain those relationships, explain what was possible during Reconstruction. But a lot of white working people decided they'd rather choose to dream to be a planter than to build a world in which there are no planters, but shared landholders with a way to make a living and care about each other.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I see it over there. Yep, Carla appears from the...
Thank you. Thank you for this event. It was thoroughly depressing, I'm sorry to say. And I'm not sure my question will help, but I heard Lonnie say that basically you couldn't have an argument at lunch because logic, et cetera, wasn't really part of what the rules were. And I feel like that's a symbol of everything that's been going on. That is, in a way, the Democrats are paralyzed because they know the rules and they keep looking like and saying, wait, isn't the Supreme Court supposed to, aren't we in the Congress supposed to? And none of that is happening. So if we talk about misinformation and truth, and who are we speaking it to? Clearly not the people at lunch.
Right.
So how are we going to move from here to some place where the conversations we are trained to be able to facilitate can make some kind of impact?
Beats me.
You answer that.
That question's for you.
Well,
But I mean, I think seriously, though, I think that part of the question is, what is the real strategy, short term and long term? How do you take advantage of what people feel will be the pain that is being felt because of healthcare and the like? I just don't see the strategy, right? And I don't see, and it's sort of like I grew up in a neighborhood where the very first fight I had, I was going to be a gentleman and let the guy hit me first. He knocked my tooth out, and I learned from that point on, always strike first. I'm waiting for the Democrats to strike. And so in some ways, playing by the rules is really great, except when nobody else is, then you've got to figure out another way to fight. So my worry is that I don't see a real strategy moving forward other than trust me, it'll happen down the road.
Right.
That is a kind of inconclusive note.
That's
and
what
yet-
historians do.
And that's what we do. And yet I have to say that unlike Carla, I was not depressed, but kind of uplifted by not only this conversation, but the earlier conversation to see just the degree of candor, of wisdom, of resilience that our colleagues bear with them. We're going to have to get a lot better at uniting ourselves to face what we're going to be facing because the rules of the game have been changed and we can't go back to playing by the old ones. So we have to figure that out and we have to do that quickly. But when we have people like this and in leadership positions, I think there's reason to have hope. And I also want to say, just as a general matter, where I find hope in moments such as this, I find it in young people. I just want to emphasize, I find it in our students who are just extraordinary fighters for justice and students of history. And I also find it in centenarians who possess such wisdom. And I'm thinking of you over there, sir. The old and the young will be our guides to the future. And
you just don't give up. You keep fighting.
That's right.
Stay resilient. You stay. You get up all the time and you get knocked down and you keep getting up.
amen.
That's right.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Lonnie Bunch, Athena Jackson, Robin Kelley.